The Hebrew word for Passover is Pesach. And I'm just going to read you a definition because we think, I thought, this was kind of my personal observation, that Passover meant the passing over of God to save those who had the blood on the doorstep and to bring judgment against those who did not. But it's so much more than that. It is about God himself passing over into the homes of every one of those families that put the blood on the doorstep, because that's what the word Pesach means. Pesach, the word means to come under the protection. Oh, the protection of a deity by crossing over, by jumping over, by stepping over, or leaping over something. And in this case, it is the threshold. The Passover that God initiated in Exodus 12 through Moses is a threshold covenant that all of primitive nations knew about. They knew about how to invoke the power of their god or gods and the protection that they believed that God would provide for them. And so here is where we see the first Passover. This is where we see the first covenant, because God himself initiates. This is so important. The greatness of God is that he's not waiting on us. He's already ahead of us. And he says to Abram, I'm gonna show you. So this is when he walks. They cut the animals. They pour the blood out. He walks through the path where the animals have been cut, and he makes this very important statement to Abram: to your descendants I have given this land. And then he describes exactly what this portion of land is, from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. And I just want to say, and from that point on, every generation after Abram was visited by that same covenant-keeping God, reassuring them that this was his plan for them. He said it to Isaac. He said it to Jacob. He said it to Joseph. He said it to Joseph because Joseph knew that his body wasn't going to stay in Egypt. His body was going to go back home. And I just want to say to you, if your father and your grandfather talked about year after year after year that God had made a promise to your great-grandfather and that you were looking forward to it, and that one of these days you were going to be the head, not the tail, and one of these days, after 400 and some odd years in Egypt, which he explains all that out. So even in the 400 years of God's covenant people being in Egypt, remember they went down into Egypt to meet their brother Joseph and to get some food in famine. And after they stayed there, it's like they stayed too long for the party, if you know what I mean. And another king took over and was very cruel. But in the back of their mind, deep in their heart, deep in their psychic, deep in their identity, they knew where they were going to end up. And I'm sure that if I had been, even in captivity, and I had Isla at my table and in my home, I would have said, sweetheart, God has promised us that we're going to inherit a piece of land, and that he's going to give it to us. So things may not be so great right now. Right? Things may not be so great right now, but God has made a promise. He is a covenant-keeping God. And so when they came in Exodus 15 to the very first Passover, we've got to understand that for 1,500 years after that initial Exodus 12 instruction, they did it every year in some way, some shape, some form. He said, this is a perpetual. This is to be done every year because I want you to remember what my plan is and what my promise was to Abraham, the father of your faith. Listen, we're grafted into that. That same DNA, That same covenant DNA that makes you just hang on when it looks foolish. And he says, I'm hanging on. I'm going to do this.